Hey folks, and welcome back to my tutorial on how to build an object-oriented Discord bot in Python. So what we did last time was get our bot up and running, just a basic instance here in the main.py file, and then we've got an event that we're listening for that once the bot is ready to accept commands, we're going to just print frogbot online to the console. Now this is pretty boring. We don't have any commands for the user to interact with right now. So we're going to look at that first, and then after that, we're going to take a look at what embeds are, what their components look like, where they fit in an embed, and then we're going to take a look at making a utility function that's just going to make our lives a lot easier when making these, because embeds are going to be our primary way of responding to the user. We're not going to use basic text in a message. For example, if I just type in basic text, this is just message content. This is boring. However, the profile that I showed you earlier is an embedded message, and that's going to give us a lot richer options. So let's get started. In our project directory, I want to create a new folder called Cogs, and within Cogs, I want to create a new Python file called c_testing. I like to preface all my cog files with C just so they don't get mixed up with class files or utility files. It's very, very obvious which ones are the cogs. So let's get started with our imports. The first import we're going to use is to help us with our type hinting, and it needs to go in the very, very first line. So we're going to say from future, import annotations. This is going to allow us to do type hinting without including quotation marks around our type. So if I was to say, just as an example, bot, which is of type bot, equals whatever we've passed in. This is obviously not going to work, but the type hint is right here, the :bot. Now typically if we don't include the future annotations import, we would need to put quotation marks around this in order to alert Python that we're just type hinting, we don't actually want to instantiate this class. However, once we make this import, we don't need to include those quotation marks, and Python is going to understand exactly what we're trying to do. Very good. So under that, let's go ahead and say from Discord, and we're going to import a couple of things, application context and cog. And from typing, from discord.embeds, and we need to import this directly because it's not defined in the project as an export, but we need to use it as a sentinel value in the function we're about to build. So I just wanted to use empty embed. Again, this is a sentinel value that basically alerts Discord not to render the particular section of the embed that we pass this for. It's going to become a little bit more obvious once we build the function though. Okay, and then from typing, I want to import type checking in all caps. What this does is when you're in an IDE environment, this global variable is set to true. However, once you go into production, this variable is going to be set to false. So this helps us avoid circular dependencies in our code. Okay, and then finally under here, we're going to use type checking. So if type checking, which means if we're in an IDE environment and we're not in production, I want to go ahead and say from Discord import bot, because we're not going to be instantiating a bot in the code, we're just using it for type hinting. So let's drop a horizontal rule right here. And let's go ahead and set up our class. So I'm just going to call this class testing to start. We can make proper ones here in a bit, and I'm going to make it of type cog. Now we're going to define the init, and the init function is going to take one parameter, and that's a bot of type bot. Surprising, right? And we're going to set self.bot, which again is of type bot, equal to the bot we passed in. Okay, the last thing I want to do is I want to define a setup function down here at the bottom. So make sure you're outside of the class definition, and we're going to say def setup. And in here we're going to take a bot, again, of type bot. It's not going to give us a return, and we're just going to put one line here. We're going to say bot.addCog, and we're going to put in the name of the cog we just created right here, and we're going to pass in the bot that the function gets. So as you can see, the bot is actually kind of being threaded almost like through a needle throughout our code. And this is how we're going to be able to access the client from inside other classes. So next, PyCort doesn't inherently know to load the cogs that we have in this directory. So let's head back over to our main.py file, and right under the bot event, I want to add another section, and this is going to be our cog load logic. So I'll explain as we go, but it's pretty straightforward. So here we've got, for file name, in os.list directory, I'm going to say /cogs, so this folder that we just made. So for every file in this folder, if the file ends with .py, and this is important, and the file name is not in it. So if it's an initializer file, we don't want to import that. That's going to cause problems. Those aren't going to have a setup function, and PyCord's going to crash. So we're just going to say bot.load extension fstring cogs dot the name of the file, not fail, file name, and then we're going to say sub -3. So that's going to get rid of the .py suffix and just give us the main name of the file. So again, right here, we're looping through the files in the cogs directory. If it's a Python file and not an initializer file, we're going to load that extension just like this. Okay, so next up, now that we've got our cogs loaded, let's just make a basic testing command just to see what's going on and make sure we can get responses from our bot. So the first thing I want to do is I want to import the /command decorator up here in my imports. And then inside the class, we're going to say @/command, and in parentheses, we're just going to type whatever name you want to give the command. Make sure it's undercase though, and make sure we're using keyword arguments. So we're going to say async def. Keep in mind async and await syntax is important for when you're communicating with Discord, because anytime you send information to Discord, we need to wait for Discord to acknowledge that. So we're just going to call this whatever, testing command. And it gets self automatically, obviously, but we're also going to pass in a CTX, which is a type application context. And this is passed in by the bot itself, and it's going to give us all the surrounding information about the invocation of the command. Channel, guild, user, and a number of other bits of data that we can use inside of our bot. So this isn't going to be too complicated. I just want to say await, because again, we're sending this to Discord. ctx.respond heard your command. If I could spell, that'd be excellent. There we go. Okay, so this is all we need to do to get a basic command going. Let's go ahead and run our bot and head over to Discord. And we're just going to say testing. We should get a response back, and there we go. Our command was heard. Very good. So next I want to take a look at embeds and see what the components of those are and how we can build those easily, since they're going to be our primary method of sending information back to the user. So let's jump back into our IDE and get rid of our bot instance for now. And over here in our cog file, I want to go ahead and delete this await line. We're going to send a message back once we've constructed an embed, but for now let's just delete that. So up here in my imports, I want to import two more things. I want to do an embed, and I want to do embed field. You'll see what we're doing with these in a moment. So let's look at the PyCord documentation here. Here we go. So this is the documentation for an embed. And you'll notice that we have a number of attributes over here. And we've got some set methods as well that correspond to a number of the attributes. So let's take a look at which ones of these we can set, and then we'll see where those appear in the actual embed. So the things that we can set are author, color, description, the fields, the footer, the main image, and the thumbnail, the timestamp, the title, and the URL. Okay, so that's a lot of fields. And typically you can set these simply by passing the value to the attribute itself. However, again, we've got these over here that are set. So set author, set footer, set image, etc. And this is how we're going to set these particular attributes. You need to pass keyword arguments to these methods in order to set them up. Okay, so that's enough looking at the docs. Let's go ahead and do some code. Okay, so let's instantiate our embed here. we're just going to call it what it is, embed equals embed, the class, and we can pass a handful of things into the constructor. So the first thing I want to pass is the title, and this is just going to say frogbot embed. I want to pass the description, so this is going to be the main body of the embed. You can have I think you can have up to 4,000 characters in the description. So I'm just going to paste something simple in here, a cute little story that I wrote just to give you a feel for where this is located and what the information is going to do formatting wise. The next thing I want to pass in is the URL. This is an underlying link to the title. So if you provide the URL, the title is going to turn blue and it's going to get underlined, indicating that it's a hyperlink. And we'll show you that. And then the last thing I want to pass in is the color. The color is the accent, the very, very thin accent bar on the left-hand side of the embed that you can change the color of to give it a little bit more personality. This particular parameter will take in either a color class from Discord or it'll take in a 16-bit integer. I just happen to know the hex code for my personal favorite color, so I'm going to give it a 16-bit integer and make sure we put in the hex code in quotes. And we're going to say 16-bit sign. Okay, so this is going to give us a basic embed, but let's go ahead and add all the other fields and all the other data points as well so we can see where those come in. So first up, we'll start at the top. I want to look at the author. So in order to set the author, we can't pass that directly to the attribute. Remember, we need to use this method right here, setAuthor. So I'm going to say embed.setAuthor, and we're going to be able to pass it 3 parameters. Now for the author and the footer, in order to display the icon next to it, you need to pass the main text, or else Discord's just going to ignore it. So for the main author text, I'm just going to say frogbot. And for the URL, which again is an underlying URL for the title text, the author text, just like we have up here for the title text, I'll just pass in this. And the icon URL, this is going to be a very, very small icon that appears to the left of the author text. And I'm just going to pass this in because it's a cute image that I just happen to have handy. So we did the author. Let's go to the other end of the embed, and we're going to set the footer. This only takes 2 parameters. It takes a text, which can be up to 2,000 characters, and that's going to make it extremely versatile later on. But for now, we're just going to say frogbot by Allegro. I like to use this for attribution if we really don't have anything else. And then the icon URL is going to be this. For this particular situation, I'm just going to make it the same as the author, just for demonstration purposes. Okay, following along? Excellent. So the next thing I want to do is set up the images. So let's set the thumbnail first. The URL for the thumbnail is, I'll just make it equal to the image we've been using. I encourage you to use your own images just to see how they get set up, but I'm pretty boring. I'm just going to use the one. Embed.setImage now. This is going to be the main image that appears at the bottom of the embed. And just to give you a little bit of perspective on what size images we want, I'm going to include a different one here. This is a landscape orientation image, so you'll see why that's important here once we preview the embed. Okay, so before we do the timestamp, I'm going to go up here to my imports and say from datetime import datetime. So we want the class itself. So let's set the embed timestamp to datetime.now. You can set it to any date time you want, past, present, future, whatever, but I just like to use now. That's typically the only circumstance under which I include a timestamp. Okay, so lastly, I want to set the fields for the embed. I'm going to paste in here a list of fields that I prepared already, and then I'll explain what we've got going on. Okay, so as you can see, I've got 7 fields in this list right here. You can have up to 25 fields on an embed. Right here, these first 3 fields, the inline value is marked true. The last 3 fields also have the inline value as true, and this center field has it set as false. So you might be wondering what's the significance of that? Well, you'll see once the embed is rendered that any time an inline is set to false, that's going to make a new row of fields. So these three right here are going to be arranged in a single row with 3 columns. Similarly, these 3 are going to have the same setup, but this one's going to be all by itself in the middle because we've set inline to false. We've said we want this on its own row. Great, so those are all the parts of the embed that we need to get set up. I'm just going to say at the very end, await. We did this before ctx.respond, and I want to pass the embed in as the embed parameter. Okay, so no red squigglies. We're doing good. Let's test. All right, we're online, and let's run the testing command. Excellent. So you can see right here we've got our embed. It popped up. So let's go over the different parts. Up here at the top, we have the author. You can see when I mouse over, it gets an underline, meaning that it's going to open up a link for us. Similarly with the title, it's blue because we have a link underlying, and it highlights as an underline when we mouse over it. We've got 2 images right here, one by the footer and one by the author. They're the same wah-wah trombone I've got here, but again, it's just for demonstration purposes. We've got the footer down here saying Frogbot by Allegro, and then the timestamp that we set. So here in the center, this is our description. Again, this is going to be the chunkiest part of the embed in most cases. And here are the fields that we set up. So again, the first 3 fields are inline, and I marked that with the text. And then the 4th field is not inline, and you can see it has its own row in the set of fields. This is going to be handy later as we start formatting and deciding where information is going to be sitting in the embed. Great. So when I look at this code, my initial thought is, oh, that's kind of messy, that's kind of bulky, that's really unruly, and just, it's a little confusing. So what I want to do is I want to make a utility function where we can pass in as much of this information as we want as a one-stop shop. So, for instance, if you only want an embed with a title, an image, and a footer, you can pass that in, and the function we're about to make is going to pass empty values for the rest of the fields. So let's take a look at how to do that. Alrighty, so in project directory, let's make a new file, a new folder, and we'll call it utilities. And then under utilities, I want to make a new file, this time a Python file called utils. Alrighty, so this is going to be where we keep all the functions that are used throughout the code, so not in just one particular module. These are going to be scattered throughout the entire bot. So the first thing I want to do is do our imports. It's going to be super easy in this particular case. We're going to say, again, from future, import annotations. Because remember, we keep that we enter that import at the top of every module, so we can use our type hinting. And we're going to say from datetime, import datetime. And from Discord, okay, so from Discord, we're going to import a handful of things. I want to import color with a U, embed field, and then from discord.embeds, I want to import empty embed as well. Format that. Okay, and lastly, from typing, we're going to import a plethora of things. So we're going to import type checking, because we do that in every module. We're going to import any, optional, tuple, and union for now. Oh, and list, very important. So let's drop a horizontal rule in here. And don't forget to add if type checking. Now we don't have any classes that we need to use, that we need to pull an import for right now, so I'm just going to say pass, but we'll definitely be back to add some stuff to that as we bulk up the file. So next up, let's go ahead and make a function called makeEmbed. This is just a normal function, not a coroutine, so don't worry about async. And we're going to drop this down because it's going to have a lot of parameters. It's going to have a parameter for each element of the embed. So first thing I want to do is put a star. This is going to force all the following arguments to be keyword arguments. So we're going to add a parameter for each part of the embed. So I'm going to say title, which is of type string, is by default equal to empty embed. Most of these things are going to be strings equal to empty embed, so I'm just going to copy this so I can paste it quickly. We've got the description, which is a string equal to empty embed. Make sure we include our commas. We've got the URL, which is surprisingly a string equal to empty embed. Okay, the next parameter, though, is the color. So I'm going to make the color an optional union of type color or int. And we're going to set that equal to none, not empty embed. So the reason we're doing none is that if you pass none for this, it's going to give you the default gray accent, which is what we want. We want it to be a non-accent. Okay, so the next handful of things we're going to do really quickly because they have the same typing and the same default value. So I'm going to say thumbnail URL, image URL, make sure we include commas, author name, author text, let's call it text, author URL, author icon. Do the same with the footer, footer text, and footer icon. We need to go ahead and pass the timestamp option as well. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to make this a union of either a either a date time or a Boolean. And then I'm going to set this to false. So what are we doing here? Why are we making a union, and why is it one of them a Boolean? So the logic behind this is that we can include a timestamp for any time past, present, or future on our embeds. Now, while I don't typically have a usage for doing other timestamps besides a current one, we want to make this function as versatile as possible so that it can be used in as many situations as possible. So you'll see our logic down lower, but if we pass a date time in here, we're going to apply that date time as the timestamp. However, if we pass a Boolean in here, a true Boolean, we're going to just set the timestamp to now. And of course, if we set a false Boolean, then it's just not going to include it. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is we're going to define our fields. And this is going to be a little complicated, so I'm going to type it out and then I'll explain exactly what the typing is for this. So it's optional, list, union, tuple, string, any, Boolean, and or embed field. Okay, so what this is saying, and we'll set this to none, what this is saying is we may possibly have a list of either tuples that contain a string, a value, and a Boolean, or embed fields, or a mixture of both. So we'll look at the logic on how to handle a mixture of multiple classes from a parameter. This returns an embed, and then let's drop down and we'll start writing the function. And actually, before we start the body of the function, I want to paste in a doc string. So documentation is really important, and I think it's particularly important in this function because we've got a lot of stuff going on, actually. And you know, if we forget exactly what one of these parameters is, we're going to be able to look at the type hint, I'm sorry, not the type hint, excuse me, the IDE information, and it's going to tell us in this tooltip everything that we just put in to that doc string. And that's going to be a huge help if we need like a more detailed description of what that parameter is. Okay. So you can write your own doc string, or you can just copy this off the project files that I provide, but it's good to have, at least for utility functions that we're going to be reusing frequently. So we'll start by instantiating an embed, and we'll just call it embed as usual. And we can pass 4 things into the constructor. So I want to pass the color, I want to pass the title, I want to pass the description, and I want to pass the URL. So if we fail to pass any of these into the function, it's going to default to empty embed, or in the case of color, none. And that's just going to prevent Discord from rendering that particular section. Okay, so what's the next thing we want to do? I want to process images. So let's say embed.setThumbnail with the URL equal to, you guessed it, the thumbnail URL. And we'll do the same thing but with the image. Okay, good. Now we've got a little bit of validation that we need to do, because with the footer and the author, if you provide an icon URL or a regular URL in the case of the author, but not the text or the name, it's not going to render that. In fact, it'll throw an error saying that you didn't include a required piece of information. So let's just go ahead and avoid those errors entirely right here. We'll look at the author first. So if the author name, which remember, if the author name, which remember is the required bit of information, is not an empty embed, which means that we provided it, then we can set the author value for the embed. There we go. So we're just going to say author text equals author text, author URL. Oh, excuse me, not author URL. Just, there we go. The parameters name, URL is the author URL, and the icon URL is the author icon. There we go. So again, we're only setting that if we've provided text in order to render it. Okay, so the same thing with the footer. If the footer text is not an empty embed, then we're going to go ahead and set the footer. And we're going to say the text is equal to the footer text, and the icon URL is equal to the footer icon. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, two things left that we need to process. We're going to look at our timestamp right now. If is instance timestamp, so we're looking at the class of the timestamp, and if it's a date time, I just want to say embed.timestamp equals timestamp, because we can just pass that date time directly to it. Okay, but what if it's true? So elif timestamp is true, because again, we could pass in a Boolean if we wanted to. Then I just want to say embed.timestamp is going to equal datetime.now. Just like that. So we're going to set the current time as the timestamp on the embed. Otherwise, we're going to ignore it. So finally, we're going to write the logic for importing our fields. So like we said up here in the parameters, we can include a list of either tuples or embed fields, and we can process either of those. So we set the default value for fields to none. So let's check if fields is not none. Then we can process. So the first thing I want to check is if we passed a list of only embed fields, we can just set that directly to the embed without any more processing. So if all is instance f embed field for f in fields, so we're looping through all of the fields in the fields list, and we're checking to see if it's an embed field, and we want to make sure all of them are. So if that's the case, we're going to say embed.fields equals, you guessed it, fields. Okay, so what if they're not all embed fields? So we're going to need to loop through, and we're going to need to analyze each one. So if the field that we're focusing on is of type embed field, we can just add that directly to the fields. Embed.fields.append f. But what if it's not an embed field? What if it's a tuple? So let's add a condition for that. Excuse me. We're going to say embed.addField, which is a provided method, and then we're just going to break that tuple down. So it's going to be name is f sub 0, because again, f is the iteration in the fields that we're at. The value is f sub 1, and inline is f sub 2. Okay, now, elif, excuse me, let's make sure we include the entire function call here, f, and then if this is a tuple, then we'll run this logic right here. But what if it's neither of those? What if we screwed up and passed something weird? Well, I'm just going to say continue. We're just going to ignore it silently. It's the easiest thing to do, and it'll be pretty obvious if something we wrote doesn't appear in our embed in production. So we can go address that then. All right, so this covers the setup of the embed function. I'm just going to return the finished embed here at the end, and everything should be kosher. All right. So I'm not going to run over this again because it's a lot of code. I just want to go ahead and put it into production. So let's get rid of all this that we made. It's messy, it's not pretty, and we're going to replace it. And let's get rid of our imports too. We don't need these imports anymore. Okay, so I want to import from utilities .utils import make embed. However, this seems kind of verbose, saying utilities.utils. So what I'm going to do is in our utilities folder, I'm going to build a new Python file, and we're going to call it dunderInit. So if you remember from our cog load logic right here, we're looking for files that are not dunderInit. You might have asked, what is the significance of that? Well, what we're going to do in the dunderInit method, or excuse me, the dunderInit module, is I'm going to say, since we're inside the utilities folder, I'm going to say from utilities, or utils, excuse me, that's what we named it, import star. Now you'll see where we're going with this in a minute, but within utils, this is now going to import every class that we have in this module. But that's not good, right? Because it's also going to import these classes that we imported here at the top, and that can cause circular dependencies, break everything, and it's just not good. So under the type checking and above the function definition for make embed, I want to define a variable called dunderAll, and this is going to be equal to a tuple in which we pass the string values of the names of the functions that we want to export from this module. So for now, I only want to put make embed here because it's the only function we have defined. And now when we import star from our init module, it's only going to import things inside this all list. So we're going to include all in all of our modules just to keep things clean so we know what's being exported into other files. But that's the basic idea of how init files work. You can even see over here the utilities directory has a different looking file icon, and if I mouse over it, it says, there we go, package. So over here, instead of from utilities.utils, I'm just going to say from utilities. So from the package that we created called utilities, I just want to import make embed, just like that. Okay, so now let's build the same embed that we had earlier. I'm going to cheat. I've already got one built up right here. So I can copy and paste it in. And author text, that's better. And I think that should cover it. Author, oh, we didn't include the footer. Silly me. So let's say footer text is footer. And the footer URL can just be this. Or the footer icon, excuse me. Okay, so you can already see that this is a lot simpler. It fits within my screen right now. So, and it just feels easier to read. So lastly, I'm just going to add the embed field import up here since we're defining some right here in the center. And then I just want to await ctx.respond, and we're going to pass in the embed that we created. Okay? Beautiful. So if we boot this now, it should work. No, it didn't work. Let's see. No module named utils. Okay, so I located the issue. As always, it's something silly. Let's go back over to our init file that we just made. We need to include a dot right there. So that's telling Python that we're referencing the file within this directory. So we'll always make sure in our init files we have a dot before any module we're importing. Okay, so now we can close those, and now let's test. There we go. That's much better. So so here's the embed we made before. And let's test again. And you can see they're identical. So our function has performed the exact same task that we did before, but in a much less verbose and a much cleaner way. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here for now. I think the next tutorial we're going to look at some planning for our profiles, and maybe we'll even jump in and get a little designing going. So thanks much, and we'll see you next time.